So when we talk about learning outcome 3, we are going to be looking at understanding the process through which notes can be made or taken from a variety of sources. So if I relate to what I mentioned earlier, in terms of secretaries, personal secretaries, legal secretaries, people basically looking at taking such notes during dictation or during court proceedings, they used to have or know a particular type of, language, which was called the shorthand. Have you heard about shorthand?
Yes, please.
So when we talk about shorthand, what we do get to see is that was an effective route for legal secretaries to take notes while they were being dictated, case histories, or when barristers, solicitors were looking at preparing documentation and a lot of reading was done, and somebody in their office would sit down, work with them, and obviously take a lot of notes which were then typed out later in the electronic version. So similarly, in the modern day times, we need to understand some of the techniques through which note taking can be done. This is what we are going to be studying, in learning outcome 3. So it has 3 assessment criteria. We are looking at understanding what are the key points that you look at when you collect information from a variety of sources. And we will look at learning about what is active listening skills, and we look at various techniques through which notes can be taken. When you look at paraphrasing, when you look at skimming, when you look at taking or gleaning information from a variety of sources to support the documentation that you're preparing for a case or maybe for a client. And then we will also try and relate it to what is called the Oscala referencing system. Now, this particular technique, when we talk about, is specifically related, to the legal profession. And this primarily is a way through which we can look at referencing data from primary sources. And these typically tend to be followed, in the case of when we look at, legal proceedings, court proceedings. And when we cite a particular source, it can either be done directly or indirectly. And indirectly would mean that we are looking at paraphrasing or basically putting the basic essence of the idea in our own words without changing the whole meaning of it. And when this is done in the footnote of the document, then the style of referencing is called Oscala. So this is what we are going to be looking at specifically in the legal profession, because when you read a page or when you read a history or a case history on a particular page, what tends to happen is anything which has been used to reference it from previous cases, previous judgments, you would normally see footnotes being applied to certain part of the text, and that is depicted at the bottom of the page, in the footer of the page. And this style of referencing typically tends to be when we use superscript. That means 2 raised to the power 3. So when we use it in mathematics, sometimes when you use superscript and then you mention that is a footnote in the footer section of that page, would be the technique through which we use what is called the Oscala referencing system. So we'll get into a bit of detail in this learning outcome 3 to understand these 3 basic bits. And I've got a few slides that we will go through, which will hopefully cover some of the content to look at, given here in terms of note-taking techniques, what is active reading and active listening, and then we also look at, the use of body language, eye contact, how do you acknowledge clients or, statements that are read out, and then how do we look at reviewing some of these, when I say, data which is collected, presented, or compiled, and how do we reference it using, the Oscala referencing system. So this is the crux that we need to look at in the learning outcome 3. And let's start with the first one, which is to understand why do we need the technique of note-taking, and in general, what are the strategies through which notes are taken, and understand some of the key concepts like active listening, active reading. So we'll dwell into some of these to get into a bit more detail. Now, let me start off by asking 1 or 2 general questions just to get the discussion going. So these general questions are related to, have you heard about, note-taking, and have you tried this in your life in real time in terms of when you do note-taking under certain situations? Any idea? How would you give me an example of note-taking?
Yeah, I do. At uni, I do take I did take notes, but not as professional secretaries who use shorthands like medical doctors and um, other legal secretaries.
Correct. So let me give you a very simple example. I was doing some note taking today when my wife was asking me to make a shopping list. So she was dictating, and I had taken a piece of paper and a pen, and I had made a grocery list or list of things that we had to bring, from Tesco's, or at the end of the day, we end up going to Costco's to buy a lot of stuff. So a simple case or an example of sometimes when you have to remember a few things, or you make a list out in order to, use that maybe in the future. For, in this case, the activity was shopping. In this case, the activity was to going out to get some, home items. And what she did was she dictated to me, and I basically took a pen and paper and made a list of what all we needed to get. So this is a very simple example of what we normally look at when note taking happens, because it's a practice through which you record information, and the recording of information can be done in different forms, platforms, and under different situations. So when we talk about note taking, it could be any form of note taking. When you tell your child, or when you tell someone in the office that, hang on, can I tell you, can you make a note of this? This is something important. Or when you are in a meeting and you ask maybe your colleagues or peers to essentially make notes when you're doing a presentation, they are all using this system or this technique, wherein what they're trying to do is, in their own words, trying to summarize the information that they are seeing, maybe hearing, or they are seeing, hearing, and also analyzing, and they are taking some notes on it in order to remember the key takeaway points or key points that they can actually remember from that information, which might relate or become useful for them in the future. So this particular process through which you are recording information, which could be done in different from different sources and on different platforms. Sometimes you see when you call your colleagues to meetings, what will happen is you'll see that, okay, some of them bring across their notepad and pens, some of them bring their laptops, some of them, if, because of the iPad and the tablets becoming very popular because they have touch screen. So sometimes you will see colleagues, if you're calling them to a meeting or if you're going to a meeting, a lot of people take different forms of, let's say, products or devices in order for them to actually refer to or reference or basically, make or take certain notes. So that is why different platforms. Now, what happens when we are asking you to take note, or when sometimes you hear this comment that, can you note this point down, or can you, make a note of this? But what you're trying to do is essentially asking the person to make a record of the essential information which you think would be important for the person to recall at some point in time when the work is given, or when they actually need to do that work to be able to say accomplish a goal or finish a task. So in general, when we talk about notes, or when we use this, talk about a situation wherein you're required to make notes, you're going to be in a position wherein you're going to be listening. That means you are going to be the person who's actually going to listen. And with the process through which you go through in terms of listening, at some stage, what will happen is the points that you feel are important, or the information that you feel is a bit more important, or you can actually forget, or it is of relevance to a certain thing that has been told, you would actually make a note of it or write it down so that it's easy for you to remember and use that in the future. Now, this process of note taking involves, listening, which is one of the key ingredients, or key parts of how people make notes. So you have to listen to something to be able to make notes. Sometimes what happens is, like, we are doing a blended learning session. You might go through the slides, you are seeing it on your screen, but you might also be making some notes because you're listening to things which are not on the slide, which I'm explaining. And sometimes you would feel, okay, that's an important point. Let me make a note of it. So what is happening is you're using the process of active listening, because I'm talking to you right now. You're not listening to a recording, or you're not listening, to a lecture which is which has been recorded in the past, And that is why this process will be active. It is something that you're doing on a one-on-one basis with me as a lecturer, and that will be active listening. Now, if you were to listen to a recording on your own from the Moodle, from our VLE platform, and the reason being maybe you missed out this lecture and you want to review what was taught and you're going through that recording, then in that case, that will be passive listening because you're listening to the lecture on your own. Maybe it is a one-way process because you're actually synthesizing everything which has been recorded and you're listening to it. There is no opportunity for you to ask questions or raise queries, or you are not able to feedback, and that is why that process is going to be passive listening. So listening is one of the most important tools that we look at, when we talk about English language in general, but also from a point of view of communication. Now, I'm sure that you know English as a language. When we talk about it, it has 4 components. What are these 4 components? Any idea? What are these 4 components?
Comprehension.
Okay.
Written.
Yes. So reading. Yes. Reading is one of the components. What else?
And composition.
Okay, you're going into say writing bit, but you have reading, you have writing, you have speaking, and you have listening. Correct? So when you look at English or any language in general, that will always have 4 components. You have reading, you have writing, you have listening, and you have speaking. So when we look at communication skills, which are very important in the legal profession, what we want to be able to do is understand the process through which you can do, you can gather a lot of data, collect a lot of notes, make a lot of, note down a lot of important points or summaries, sometimes when you're in court or when you're in discussions, and that involves the process of active listening. So listening, key part of communication skills. We probably spend a lot of time in our lives doing listening. Listening can also be done primarily because sometimes this can be active. That means you're participating, you're giving feedback, but you're also contributing to that discussion, and that is why it is active. And sometimes listening can be passive, wherein you are a passive listener. You're sitting in the back, you're just listening to the discussion, you're listening to the argument which is taking place, but you don't feel that you need to intervene or contribute. And that is where you are an audience, wherein you are actually just observing and taking it in, and that would be basically passive listening. Now, when we talk about our daily communication, this is from research that listening contributes or assumes 45% of our time in communication. 9%, reading is 16, and speaking tends to be 30. So the 2 main components of I would say communication on a day-to-day basis in our lives tend to be listening and speaking. Now, there is something which is called the learning pyramid. And when we look at learning things, when you look at something, when you're exposed to something new and you have not read about it, you have not heard about it, and in those cases, when you hear about it, what happens is your brain actually synthesizes this. And in this case, what we do is we basically talk about something called the learning pyramid. And when we talk about the learning pyramid theory, basically this theory helps us understand that, when we want to look at building skills or building knowledge, what we tend to do is we tend to depict ideas, through the roots of, various, this is basically done through various ways. In some cases, this, synthesizing of information that you try and provide so that people can learn from it can be put together into a pyramid, which is called the learning pyramid. And when we look at this, the general idea is that sometimes you look at teachers, sometimes you look at practice what you're doing, sometimes you're a part of discussions, sometimes you're a part of demonstrations, sometimes you depict and talk about things audiovisually, and sometimes you're reading on your own to understand things, and that can be through the process of reading. And the one that we are doing right now is a lecture. That means you're actively going to listen to somebody who's going to be talking to you, and you might ask questions, queries, give feedback in terms of how it is going. So when we talk about the learning pyramid, this was created by a scientist called DiL, and he was basically an expert in audio-visual education, and he introduced this particular model of the learning pyramid back in the 1940s, mid-1940s. And he came up with this method of what is called, the audio-visual method of education and teaching. And in this, he defined what is called, the methods through which people actually learn. So sometimes people learn through, various techniques, and in some cases, you have to go through the process of learning. That means you have to be taught. And in some cases, when you look at, this as a process happening, we have gone through schooling, in terms of doing education, and that process through which we have learned a lot of things which are very basics of in our life. We have done that through the schooling route, and in the schooling route, we have done most of it through teaching. So most of the knowledge that we have gained has been imparted by our teachers to us, and that allows us to build those skills that are required that we also use today. So these skills, when we talk about, will be things like that you've learned mathematics, you've learned English, you've learned about history, geography, and how you've learned about this is that somebody here has been in that position as a teacher who has taught you about, who had more knowledge about the subject and has basically imparted that knowledge to you, and you basically look at, learning those things through the teaching route. And then there is a decrease. So sometimes you have to learn things by doing practice. So one of the things that you can remember, obviously, and relate to when I say when you learn by practice is if you put your hand over fire, you learn that if I put my hand over fire, it burns, and you don't do that mistake again. When you look at cycling, when you look at swimming, some of these things you actually learn by practice. You experience them, you do it yourself, you don't take somebody else's word for it. You do it, you go through that experience and obviously learn. Sometimes you'll see people will pick up things through discussions. So when you go into trainings and seminars and you attend trainings which are organized maybe for a day, 2-day, 3-day short training seminars that you go to, in those training seminars, when you look at learning, the process of learning happens through predominantly discussion. There are lots of active discussions, group discussions which happen, and different tasks and activities. You would see a trainer would break you up into different groups, and what he would do is assign certain tasks and activities, and those would then allow you to come in and participate. Sometimes they ask you to also do a bit of demonstration. They say 4 of you make this presentation, somebody will present, somebody will make the slide, somebody will take questions, and that part of it utilizes discussion and demonstration. Audiovisual, a particular example that we look at today that we pick up a lot of things from is YouTube. You look at television, you look at any form of screen from which you're able to get information which is useful to you. You're able to synthesize that, and when you are interacting through the audiovisual route. So this pyramid is an understanding, gives you an understanding. When Edgar DiL came out with it, and he was a specialist in the audiovisual side of education, and his main aim was that learning happens through different ways, and this form of learning which happens through different ways, he depicted this into what is called the learning pyramid, and this is what we also need to know and understand. And now the other thing is, when we talk about say for example going to active listening, when we talk about active listening, there is a lot of things which are involved in the process of active listening. So when we define, say, active listening, what we also mean by that is that there are a number of different types of techniques which we need to be able to use, and that would help us get the right amount of information that we need, or the correct amount of information that we need. And this method of learning, which is normally used by students, or essentially when you are in situations wherein you are learning, can be done actively and by experimentally involving yourself through the process of listening, asking open-ended questions, requesting for clarification. You are actually looking at then reflecting your feelings. If you don't accept something, you would normally say that, okay, this was my understanding, I don't think this is correct. Can you explain that a bit further? And then you're actually, let's say, actively engaging in that discussion to ask questions, which could be open-ended or probing questions. And these allow a discussion to happen. And when we look at this kind of discussion happening, you would see, you are going to engage in what is called active listening. Now, when I talk about from a teaching perspective, like we're doing this lecture you are attending, active listening would typically facilitate a lot of things. So I could do, or I could basically in this situation, because we're doing a webinar, we could look at, simulating the process of active listening by taking up a case study, wherein we go through the case study and I'll ask you for your opinion. I'll ask you to, comment on certain areas or ask you to raise any questions. Sometimes this could be related to, asking you to show me or talk about an example, and that would involve us in discussion. And these would basically be reflective of what is called active learning. Now, there are some techniques that can help improve this in terms of a process, because if you recall this slide which says 45% of our communication involves listening. So listening is very important. So there are some tips, obviously, which have been designed around the process of active listening, and they tend to be that sometimes you have to be focused, you have to look at detecting emotions if you're presenting to a group of audience, be able to ask questions. You sometimes do not, look at, you would see most trainers would, say, could you switch off your mobiles or put them on vibrator mode if you have to ask a question. So what he's trying to do is basically tell you some, housekeeping rules, which would allow him to run the training or, do the training without any serious interruptions. And you generally follow this. So when you go into a training, you would see normally when you sit on a table or you're put into a group, you'll have a notepad or a pencil along with it so that you're able to make notes. There will be some printouts or, documents which are given, which will be summarizing what the agenda of the day is or what kind of discussion is going to happen. And then sometimes you would see the trainer would also group. If you're sitting with like-minded people or if you're sitting as friends together, you would generally see the trainer will mix you around. Say, okay, if you don't mind, can you move to this table? Can you move to that table? And that is because the trainer there or the person who's going to be presenting is looking at making sure that the group that gets formed is a balanced group and allows for interaction and, positive interaction and development to happen in terms of discussions when he starts to deliver training. Now, with this context, we then look at why do we need to take notes? Now, notes sometimes, can you think of some reasons, general reasons why you need to take notes? Any idea in terms of why do you need to take notes?
Yeah, maybe the information that is sending across is very important, or you have a short memory that you cannot grab all of them, so you need to, because it's important, you need to know them for quick reference.
Absolutely correct. Brilliant. So basically, you summarized it all, that when you look at note taking, you're looking at remembering key points, you're looking at making sure that you don't forget sometimes, because if there is lots to, let's say, intake or lots to absorb, then you are also going to be taking notes in order to make sure that you don't forget some of the important points or things which are being covered in the seminar or training or whatever. Now, sometimes when you look at note taking, what we need to understand is there are different methods of note taking as well. Let me just bring out another slide. Give me 1 second. I want to basically show it here. So what I want to be able to do is just to give me 1 second. So I want to be able to look at showing you, I think, different methods that we look at for note taking. Okay, so let me just quickly have a look. If I don't find it, I'll come back to it later. But just having a quick look. Yeah, there we go. So found that. Now, when you do the process of note taking, what we want to be able to do is also understand what are the different methods which allow us to basically do note taking. Now, note taking is one word, and note making is another phrase. So there are two different phrases. Note taking is when you are listening and you are writing it in your own words, or making important notes as far as the process of what you call noting down the information is concerned. So that tends to be the process through which you look at note taking. Now sometimes you're also asked to make notes. That means you are making the notes. So what will happen is you'll be given some pieces of information. And when I mentioned you about the process of what is called active listening, sometimes you're listening to the lecture like you're doing it now, then because you're listening to me live, this process would be what is called active listening. But if you're then listening to a recording, at some stage what will happen is that you will basically say that, okay, you are listening to a recorded lecture, and with that recorded lecture, what you're trying to then do is basically make notes, and that in that case would be passive listening. So when you look at listening to a recording and then you make notes, that process would be called note making. You see the subtle difference between note taking, which is a passive process wherein you are not actively involved, but when you are making notes by listening to something which is currently going on as an activity, then in that case, that process is going to be called note making. Now, when you take notes, there are three methods through which note taking can be done. There is a method called outline method. There's a method called mind mapping method. And the third method through which note taking can be done is called the Cardinal system or Cardinal method. Now, there are subtle differences in terms of how these notes are made. So the outline method follows a certain terminology wherein you basically use numerals or bullet points to make, note down important points or to capture the data that you're trying to capture of information. When we look at mind mapping, what you do is you start off by taking notes on the right hand side by using them as, writing them down on bullet points, but you also group them into key categories. So what are the key bits in the training? So today in the training, we're going to be looking at learning about health and safety. Within health and safety, you're going to be looking at the incident report. You're looking at how to, get in touch with the health and safety executive. You're going to be looking at some policies. And finally, what we're going to be doing is practicing the training by implementing a health and safety routine or a drill in the office. So here there are four parts to the training. So what you do in the mind mapping method would be you'll basically note or make points, take down some notes, but you group them into certain activities, and that grouping will allow you to also remember that these were the various parts through which you have actually gone through in terms of training. And the last system tends to be, the Cardinal method. And in the Cardinal system, what you tend to do is, there are some handouts which I will provide, but basically what we want to understand is that this is a type of system in which the note taking actually was devised by, a education professor called Walter Popp, way back in the 1940s, and he worked for Cornell University. That's why it's called the Cardinal method. And what he advocated, he was basically a professor in the Cornell University, and what he advocated was that this form of note taking, organizes and condenses the notes in your own words, so that at some stage when you make notes, you're not writing down full sentences or details, but you're jotting down summarized pieces of information or points which will help recall the topic at a later stage. So in this case, if you look at the Cornell system, what it does is it will note down the main points. Like an example which I've taken on the slide is that the lecturer is talking about the nervous system in the human body, and the nervous system consists of two parts. So he's written two parts, CNS and PNS, and then central nervous system. Then he looks at which part of that central nervous system. So you're basically making notes on the contextual, you're contextualizing it on the topics, and you're looking at just writing keywords, and that system through which you make notes, wherein you write down the keywords for the topics being discussed or the discussion which is happening, and you write it down in a particular column-wise fashion. You use a columnar fashion. So if you see, there are notes which are written in column-wise format. These are row-wise. This is indented. So you write it down and you're successfully indenting the notes because there are points within or topics within the main topic. But here you follow the notes or make the notes in a columnar fashion. And because it is being done using key parts, or when I say key parts, I mean just the summarize or keywords, essentially summarize meanings using the keywords. And this form of note-taking is called, or note-making is called basically Cornell system. Now, these are three that we basically use. Sorry, these are three that we basically use, from our point of view, in terms of either, in terms of technique that we look at, because when you are in school or when you were studying, we had different ways through which people used to make notes. Some of them used to write every word which the teacher was telling. Some of us used to write just the key bullet, key points as bullets. And some of us used to write the key phrases which the lecturer or the teacher is actually covering in the class. And if you relate this to these three methods, knowingly or unknowingly, you were actually using one of these methods to summarize and note information while you were actually, basically doing them. So this part I will provide to you so that you understand, why these three methods have come about. And sometimes when you look at, in your system, when we look at, when I say the legal system, you would be in a, say, for example, have you been to courts? Have you been to a court?
Yeah, about twice.
All right, okay. So if you go into a...
not in the UK.
Okay, otherwise you've been to a court? You've been to a proceeding
with a court before.
That's great. So if you have been to a court before and you go and witness some of the proceedings which are happening, you would generally see that in front of the judge, in between the foyer or in front of the judge, normally there will be one or two, clerks or person which are sitting, legal clerks. And what they tend to do is they tend to make the notes, or they tend to note down the whole proceedings of what is currently happening. Or what kind of discussion is happening between the plaintiff and the defendant, what questions and remarks are being made. So they are basically noting down pretty much everything. And in that live, say, for example, discussion which is happening ongoing between different parties, the person sitting, or maybe one or two persons which are sitting, which are making a note of all the proceedings which are happening, they are doing note making, and that is being done through one of these techniques, either a Cornell system, or the mapping system, or basically doing it through the system of outlining, and they would capture all the proceedings which are being discussed, and later on they'll be translated into some sort of minutes of meeting, or minutes of the proceeding, which will be circulated in order to make sure that nothing is missed out of that discussion. Now, we also look at, active listening. So what I want to do is basically quickly play a small video. And this small video, what I want to do is basically show you what do we mean, by active listening in general. So let me play this small video.
Grammarly helps make your writing clear and concise, no matter where you are. Compose a cover letter.
So you're able to see the screen and hear the video?
Yeah.
Think about how much information you get every day from listening. Your boss, your colleagues, your clients, and your suppliers may communicate with you often. So will your family and friends. How much of what all these people say do you pay attention to? How much are you actually remembering from these conversations? Chances are it's a lot less than you think. A lot of times we act as if we're listening to the other person, but the reality is that our minds are racing to other topics or already planning what we're going to say in return. This means that we can miss important things that the other person is saying. Active listening is when you make a conscious effort to hear and understand people so that you get the complete message. There are several things you can do to become an active listener. First, you need to pay attention. We know this is a bit obvious, but it's the most important part of active listening. For instance, make eye contact with the person talking to you. Ignore outside factors like other conversations so that you can focus solely on what the person is saying. Most importantly, put your own thoughts on hold. Resist the urge to start planning out what you're going to say in return. You also need to show the other person that you're listening to them. You can nod your head, smile, and say yes occasionally. All of these signals let the other person know you're still with them. Providing feedback on what the other person has just said is another important part of active listening. For instance, all of us hear information through our own personal filters and judgments. This can affect our understanding. To make sure you heard and understood the message correctly, paraphrase it or repeat it back to the person. You can also ask questions to get more information, but make sure that you listen to what they're saying before you plan your response. You also need to avoid interrupting when they are speaking. Once they're finished, you can respond appropriately with an honest answer or opinion. Active listening is a skill that all of us should use more often. The better you are at listening, the more information you'll receive. This can pay off with big rewards in your career and strengthen your bonds with family and friends. You can find out.
So as you can see, why active listening is very important. And this re-emphasizes the point that I made earlier, is that when we look at our day-to-day communication, 49% of the time that we spend is basically spent listening. Now, in the second part of the assessment criteria, what we need to understand is how do we look at summarizing information? Now, there are various ways of doing that, and one such way through which we do it is referencing, and the other way is using paraphrasing. So what is paraphrasing? Paraphrasing is basically restating the given text or information without changing the meaning of it, but in your own words. So essentially what you're looking at is just rewriting the text that you have read, but you're rewriting that in your own words. And in order to do so, one of the reasons why we look at paraphrasing and specifically look at in this context is that when you look at your reports, when you look at writing assignments, and when you look at presenting information, sometimes you have to write it in your own words to convey the meaning, but also at the same time, write it in your own words because you do not want to plagiarize or use somebody else's, text in cases or in places wherein you're creating such reports or, creating reports for the purposes of presenting it as evidence. Now, sometimes in the legal profession, when you have to reference cases, and these cases or judgments that you reference can be utilized to present an argument in the court of law, you would also then in that case, use paraphrasing to bring that case. But in most cases, what you tend to do is you directly quote that case, giving the reference of that case between the plaintiff and the defendant, and in this case, is being passed and why the judgment is relevant to this particular case that you are citing in. And in those cases, what you tend to do is, so in this case, although you're going to be using the judgment and the reference to that case, but you're contextualizing it in terms of the information that is related to the case that you are using with, and it also then requires you to do what is called paraphrasing. Now, a simple example of this would be if you read the original text and then you write the text in your own words. So the original text here was, Bill Murray was famous for his delicious sandwiches. Children and adults love to eat it. Now, if you have to write this in your own words, which is without changing the core meaning of what the original text was, then you would write it in your own words, and that process through which you are going to do it without altering the meaning of the text or the original phrase or the paragraph would be called paraphrasing. So here, Bill Murray was known across the UK for his sandwiches, and people enjoyed his delicacies every time. So what you've done is you've changed certain words, but you've conveyed the same meaning that, that he's a person who has been known or has a history wherein he was known for producing, something which is delicious sandwiches, and people enjoyed, people of all ages actually enjoyed every time they had them. Now, when you look at, okay, let me ask you this question before telling you something about it. Do you know what is the difference between paraphrasing and summarizing. Do you know what is summarizing?
Yeah, summarizing a summary is giving a total or a comprehensive um,
Yeah, correct. Go on.
text of the content. But paraphrasing is rewriting the content in your own words
Absolutely correct.
by either increasing the words or shortening the words.
Correct. Absolutely correct. Brilliant. So basically, yes, what you've said is correct. Summarizing is the process through which you would maybe, let's say, give a brief statement of the main points of the text that have been covered or that you have read. So if I ask you to summarize, or what I would ask you to do is, Johnson, can you go away and read chapter 2 of this book, and can you summarize it in your own words to give me an understanding what does the chapter convey? So what you're going to do is maybe read the chapter, which is 10, 12, 15 pages, just assuming that it is 10, 12, 15 pages. And what you do is you then, after having read the chapter, you come back and you basically give, and basically list down the main points which convey, what was being talked about in that chapter. So sometimes when you look at buying a book, what we do is we look at the book and the back cover of the book. And the back cover of the book essentially tells you what is the essential plot of the story, or what is the book all about. Sometimes when you read or see large documents, what you do is you go into the table of contents or the index page to see what all is being covered. And what you're essentially looking at in all instances is the case through which you want to understand, okay, what is it all about? What is the summary of it? What is the crux of it? So that is sometimes the process that you also have to look at, because in the legal profession, you have to read quite a lot. And in order to understand cases and build and use these cases as arguments, when you are preparing documentation for your clients, or when you're working with the solicitor, what you tend to do is, after reading a lot of information, you summarize it. That means you basically prepare a brief statement of the main points which can be used in relation to the case or the case history that you're presenting. Now, when we look at summarizing, we need to look at asking ourselves a few basic questions. So when we look at the process of note taking, sometimes the process through which we take notes, or when we are making these notes, whether it's the mind map, the outline method, or the Cornell system, what we will generally see is that we are essentially using these methods to summarize large pieces of text into something that we can remember, or maybe shorten them up in a fact that we are able to understand the main ideas or the main reason behind why we have studied this or why we have looked at that. So the idea of summarizing is to always understand the main theme and how do we relate this to, say, for example, our case, or the information that we are trying to synthesize. Now, when we go and try and look at the Oscala referencing system, now Oscala is basically a short form for the system which was developed by Oxford University. And this system, when we talk about the full form of this, is Oxford University Standard for Citation of Legal Authorities. So when we talk about Oscala, it's an acronym, and it's an acronym for Oxford University Standard for Citation of Legal Authorities. And this system is generally used, in the case of legal context in the UK, when we try and bring primary sources and a lot of different types of secondary sources to our cases, or in cases when we are preparing and facilitating preparation of documentation to be presented in the court of law. So there are certain, characteristics of this referencing, and these characteristics typically relate to what is called the footnote referencing style. So what we tend to do is, if we are going to reference a lot of, when I say references, relate to cases which have happened in the past, or case summaries that have been published earlier. And in those cases, what we do is, when we make those references, we basically use what is called superscript. That means to a particular word or a phrase, we are going to superscript a number, and that number or that case which we have, tried to relate to for referencing is then presented in the Word document in the footnote section of the page. And this format that we follow to reference material using for information or data which is being summarized, we'll be following what is called the Oscala method of referencing. Now, you can use this system in a Microsoft Word document as well. And in references, if you have seen the Microsoft Office document, if I open this side by side, and just to relate how we can do referencing or use Oscala or Harvard or different forms of referencing system, but use them in the Word document, there is a way that we can see that. And let me try and open up a generic document. Just having a quick look, say one particular document. So let me open this particular document. And in this document, when I open it, if I have to use this technique, Oscala, to reference something which I'm going to do in terms of or presenting information, what I'm going to do is select a particular word, then go to references tab on the top. In the referencing tab, I'm going to look at something called AB, which is insert footnote. When I click on that, you would see it puts a superscript, on that word, which is warranty. Did you see this? Yeah. And then what I can do is I can reference this by clicking on, reference and then inserting what is called a footnote. And this then allows us to, create a note for what I'm trying to present. And this footnote would be, coming up here. So one, basically, which defines this is, so I can write something here, which is to reference or details of that, in the footnote. This is a gift item being given to the student for the purposes studying the course via the BLE. Now, this bit is called, we are referencing this, and you can similarly go in and put a lot of footnotes, and they will all start to cover at the bottom of the document. And this form of referencing, wherein we are capturing and providing more details, you would generally see that this is sometimes when we read comprehensions, when we read articles, and data is to be backed up by statistics. You would generally see that they will put a superscript here, and what they will say is, okay, number one relates to, please go to the website for more information. If you find somewhere number two, then it will say, okay, this relates to this particular, and this form of referencing would be called the Oscala referencing system. Is that okay?
Yes, please.
Okay, now when we look at, as in any referencing system or any reports that we create, at some stage what we do is we go back and compile a list of bibliography towards the end of the document, which will allow summary of all the references that we've used to be inserted or made available as a list. When I click on bibliography and I basically go and use a particular format, so in this case the Oscala system, it will allow us to put references of everything which has been put in the footnotes, and then allow us to create a list towards the end, and this will be called the bibliography. So bibliography is essentially a list of all secondary sources that we have used, which could be references from books, articles, journals, website, and they are all compiled in the alphabetical order in order to back up the data that you have presented in your report. Is that okay?
Yes,
now, when you look at referencing, we also look at referencing being done in this format, in a way wherein we look at, sometimes when we look at using the Oscala system, what will the system basically do when we create a bibliography would be that it will list out a table of authorities. In that table of authorities, there'll be cases, and within those cases, there'll be legislation, statutes, and statutory instruments, which will all be generated in that bibliography when we follow the Oscala referencing system. I want to try and give you an example, if you just give me 1 second, of an assignment which has been done by a student in level 5, and they have used what is called the Oscala referencing system. And I just want to try and see if I can pull that out and show you. Just 1 second, just to relate to what the system is to show you as well. Just let me find it quickly. There we go. Got it. So let me just open one of the cases. Just pulling one of the documents out to see if that is the case. There we go. So I'll show you an example. This is an assignment which one of the learners has submitted, because he's studying law with us at level 5, and in level 3 and level 4. So, level 5, I'm just picking out one unit. And as you can see, what he's doing is he's using the Oscala system of referencing, and anything that he's using, within the system for referencing through Microsoft Word, what it does is it presents the case, what was the case, where it is available in terms of, the publishing, and, what date it was published and when he has last accessed it. So if you look at this particular system, where he puts another superscript here using Oscala system, which is in this side public non-prosecution service, again, the case reference becomes available. And as you can see, he's using successively, references using the Oscala system, wherein the case history, he references the case, the legislation, the statute, and the statutory instrument or the judgment which was passed normally comes in, automatically. And this is what he has compiled going forward in the bibliography in a bit more detail, so that when we have to see that what has been referenced, and what is the source through which it has been referenced, and what is the case, what was the judgment which was passed, can easily be accounted for by, following the Oscala referencing system. Yeah.
Yes,
and
please.
then in the bibliography, what tends to happen is that the bibliography, when you generate, it is generated in an alphabetical manner. As you can see, it starts with A, B, C, alphabetical manner, and then it basically lists out all the references which have been covered in the footnote, but also gives out the details in terms of, whether it was a website, whether it was a book, a journal, or an internet source from which it was referenced. And this is what is important when we look at, the Oscala referencing system. So this is something that you will do as well, at least, for one odd assignment, just to get this into practice. So when we cover the learning outcome 4 in tomorrow, what we're going to be looking at is picking up a case history or a case which has happened. And what we will do is basically look at writing or presenting that case in our own words as a case history, as a piece of research. And in that research, what we're going to do is basically look at the Oscala system of referencing, and that would help us accomplish, the research that we want to do, studying in learning outcome 4 and 5. So in 4, you will compile the details. In 5, you're going to present it, and that would utilize the Oscala referencing system and some parts of note making, which you're going to do, because you read cases, and from the cases, you will summarize the main important points which present that. But rather than read a case which might have a documentation of 20, 30, 40, 50, 500, maybe, I don't know, depending on the case you pick, hundreds of words or pages, what you're going to do is summarize that in your own words, and you will summarize that in the main context of introduction, the case history or the background, Then you're going to present what was the judgment and what were the main arguments in the case, why it was filed. Then look at the judgment which was passed, and then what was the conclusion. And in doing so, when you basically present this in this format, what you're going to be looking at doing is using the system of referencing, which is Oscala, and that will allow you to understand how this is done when we look at specifically legal cases and the use of legal cases, because this technique is essentially a short form or an acronym for the Oxford University Standard of Citations of legal authorities. Now, last but not the least, what we want to be able to do is understand how this is done. So practically, we will look at some bits of it in terms of what and how cases are presented. What does this terminology mean? And what I will also do is just let me pull out one other thing to make it more clearer. Let me just give me 1 minute. And the reason why I want to do this is because I want to basically show you, because there are lots of cases that we refer to. And when we refer to these cases, what we do is we bring these cases from different gazettes, different publications, which basically look at, compiling these, and there's a method through which, they archive these cases. So that's easy to find. Now, when you look at how this is referenced, this bit which you look at, is a terminology which is followed when we try and reference different types of cases. So this is an example of a civil case, which is between Davis and Johnson. It was in the year 1979. 2 talks about the volume. WLR refers to the weekly law report in which it was published. And 553 is basically the page, or first page of that case report, which has been reported in that law gazette. So when you see this particular terminology, David versus Johnson, in brackets, 1979 to WLR 553, what and how would you decipher this and find this within a law gazette or a published, in a particular law publication? So when you look at this here, Lucasfilm Limited versus Ainsworth, 2011, UKSC 39, 2012, 1 AC 208. So here, there is a set terminology through which you can understand how these cases are presented. So the first part talks about the case between the plaintiff and the defendant, who were the parties involved, in which year the case was tried, what is the UK, Supreme Court Gazette, UKSC's, wherein it was published. Now this was in, published in, say, for example, 39 stands for, the volume number. And then when we talk about, again, 2001, this case was again, made a reference to in 2012, volume 1. And then basically in terms of, what was the page of the first page of the report. So when we look at these from a point of view of legal referencing, they slightly follow a different format as against Harvard referencing, which you must have also heard about. And this terminology in which cases are referenced tends to be, using what is called the, when this bibliography is developed using the Oscala style of referencing, tends to be depicting information related to a particular case. So any questions on this, Johnson, today? Any questions on this?
I think it's clear.
Okay, that's great. So what I'm going to do is, primarily, 2 or 3 slides that I've shown you in particular. I'm going to make some changes in the Learning Outcome 3 presentation. I'm going to include 1 or 2 slides which are, which I've shown you. Say, for example, one of this slide in particular, which is in terms of how the cases are referenced in law gazettes, so that it becomes a bit more clearer. There are ways in which cases are depicted. Specifically, when you look at private and public law, there are 2 types. And under private and public law, there are, most of the different laws are considered under what is called civil cases. And when you look at criminal cases, they tend to be when the state is being tried, or, when some sort of a harm or loss has occurred, and that will fall under criminal case. So there's a slight bit of terminology that is different when cases are presented or referred to, and the terminology following the Oscala system is slightly different. So here, criminal cases are represented like this: R versus James, 2006. It's it's being published in the Court of England and Wales, Court of Appeal. It's a criminal case. CRIM stands for Criminal Division, or cases which are tried under the criminal law. And then 14 tends to be the case number assigned by the court. So I will include some of these terminology, which I think would be helpful when we look at understanding the Oscala system and this law report series. So what are the different types of series which are followed in cases? So AC stands for appeal cases, CH stands for chancellery cases, Queen's Bench, King's Bench. When we look at family division, probate division. So these are important terminologies that we need to be aware of. And I think what I'm going to do is include these 3-4 slides, even though they are not directly related, but yes, because we will use Oscala referencing, and sometimes when you have to refer to different cases or case laws, and if you come across this terminology, at least you should be able to decipher what it means, and what kind of gazette is it printed in, which court it was tried in, what was the year, what was the volume, or the case number which was assigned, and this will be useful for you to have as a piece of information. So that's it for today in terms of Learning Outcome 3. Let me upload the updated version of the slide, which will hopefully be in the next couple of minutes, along with a copy of this recording. And then we will meet up for the session tomorrow, in which we are going to be looking at drafting or looking at creating a piece of research which you're going to present for Learning Outcome 4. Is that okay? Good stuff. Any questions at your end at this stage?
As for the research,
go on, Johnson. Just speak a bit louder. Just speak a bit louder if possible.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Now it's much better.
I said I'm fine with the presentation because of my background in research, so it's clear.
That's perfectly fine. Good stuff. Good stuff. So with this, I'll end the session today, and